Before human memory, a retreating glacier formed the river known to its Anishinaabe stewards as the Deshkanzibi, or Antler River. Later, some of the Deshkanzibi's flow split off from its mother, and seeking a path of least resistance, formed an oxbow meander, creating what was then an inland island of rich meadows renewed yearly by spring floods, and is now an island of land nestled in the crook of a horseshoe of muddy ponds. The meander that defines the coves was still connected to its mother when the Deshkanzibing Anishinaabe, known to the settler state as the Chippewa of the Thames, signed McKee Treaty No. 2 and London Township Treaty No. 6. The imagined borders of these treaties invisibly bisect the land in the coves, while their implementation emboldened colonizers to sever complex entanglements. Colonizers wrote these treaties dishonestly, exploiting the misalignment of worldviews and the complicated language of land transfer. These treaties hardly reflect the minutes and memories of the negotiations they came from. Despite these obfuscations and the passage of time, one thing remains clear. The Deshkanzibing Anishinaabe never gave up their rights and obligations to their ancestral land, which the City of London now occupies, and they did not relinquish their authority over the Deshkanzibi riverbed. The Deshkanzibi has had many names. It was later renamed La Tranche by French colonizers, and more recently was dubbed Thames River by Lieutenant Governor John Graves Simcoe. Following the banks of the cove's ponds today, we have found that only one trickling finger stretches toward the Deshkanzibi. The severing of the Deshkanzibi and the meander began over a century ago, when railway embankments blocked the river inflow. Still, we understand this place, known as the Coves, as part of the watershed that the Deshkanzibing Anishinaabe Nation never ceded. But what does ownership mean when we understand that this area also falls under the inherent indigenous right of the Minisink Lenape, also known as Munsee Delaware Nation, and the Onyataka, also known as Oneida Nation of the Thames? The waters that wore away the banks that define and protect this place also mark it as a place where we can feel what should be palpable throughout this town, province, and country. We are on stolen native land. So who does this land belong to? This answer again returns us to the river. In April 1937, the Deshkanzibi reached a height of 23 feet at its forks, causing flooding that killed 5 people and submerging homes in the coves up to their roofs. In response, the city instituted flood control measures that arrested the seasonal submerging of the lowlands held within the Oxbow. Thus, on the eve of the Second World War, the Canadian government, which had been operating a rifle range and training ground here for nearly 60 years, offered up this land for agriculture. At the same time, the increasing danger posed by Nazi Germany led the Wolf family, who were Jewish, to flee their home in Czechoslovakia. In 1939, Henry Wolf purchased nearly all the land we have mapped in the piece Tracing Careful Paths. He planted a fruit orchard, built a house, and quietly continued his centuries-old family trade, mixing paint in an old washing machine in the basement. Henry Wolf and his family established the Almatex Paint Company within a decade, the buildings multiplying, the land smothered in concrete. The business thrived in the 40s and 50s, developing a unique plastic finish paint specifically for the Canadian contribution to the war that had displaced the factory's founders. Before anyone could raise alarms about the environmental impact, Almatex became a significant employer in the city. The factory closed in 2001. Its warehouses, laboratory, and factory are gone. However, the chain-link fences topped with barbed wire, cement pads, and blocks of concrete threaded with rebar remain, marking where men mixed heavy metals, solvents, and binders to make paint. Throughout the hot, dry summer months of 2022, the Coves Collective led walks through a hole in the fence to this site. We poured water gathered from the ponds onto a living artwork. A ring of goldenrod planted into a trench we cut into the cement with a circular saw. This goldenrod removes lead in the soil, one of the many invisible presences Almatex left behind. In the center of the ring, we marked our presence by stacking rocks and chunks of concrete to form a cairn. As long as the collective takes care of this place, we will continue to remove the asphalt surrounding the circle, laying down soil and creating concentric circles of new life and reclamation. In August, the former factory site is similarly ringed with 4-foot-high goldenrod, nourishing swarms of bees, vibrantly declaring that these plant beings are already working to heal this place. The Coves Collective's work humbly draws attention to what these plant beings have already begun. We tell those who accompanied us on our walks about Mrs. Aisha Hassan, who wrote to the city in 1971 and informed them that all the birds had left the area, driven away by the stench of noxious fumes. We tell them about the paint pit children set on fire in 1966, creating a column of smoke that rose hundreds of feet above the land we stood on. We tell them about the 2 towering evergreens that were felled in 1981 when a labor strike turned violent. The Almatex management replaced the trees with a giant pole topped with a CCTV camera. One day, as we were sharing these stories, 2 deer raced around the interior perimeter of the fence, circling us before escaping through a gap known only to them. One of the youths with us that day asked, "What is the opposite of traumatized?" Through mergers and acquisitions, Valspar, a subsidiary of Sherwin-Williams, now holds title to this land. Their contractors only visit the site to patch holes in the fence and test the groundwater through locked, bright blue rectangular wells that dot the land. But does the land belong to them? We walk the trails made by humans and animals and pick up the apples that still grow on the trees planted by Henry Wolfe. Decades ago, kids used to raid the orchard, collecting grocery bags full of apples to take home to their mothers, who baked them into pies. Someone from the factory once protected their property by shooting one of the kids in the ass with a shotgun packed with rock salt. On the path that weaves between the gnarled apple trees, we once found a ginger cat consumed by the resident coyotes. A child left behind tobacco and the whispered words, "Rest in peace." The Coves is a complex environment where care and violence, contamination and reclamation coexist. Even the youngest amongst us are negotiating their place in this complex entanglement. As recently as the 1920s and 30s, the ponds that circle this land still flowed with water from the Deshkun-Zibi. They were so clear and clean that settlers set up ice harvesting businesses on their banks. Now the only water that flows into them is runoff from streets and neighborhoods. Kicking the natural sedimentation process into overdrive, the water has become nearly opaque in places. In the spring of 1970, almost all the fish in the East Pond died. Today, there are thriving populations of native species like snapping and painted turtles, flathead minnows, pumpkin seeds, and white suckers. But even more abundant are goldfish and common carp. The carp, a non-native giant in these small waterways, stir up the silt, keeping sunlight from penetrating the water and aquatic vegetation from taking root. Their large scales reflect bright sunlight as their golden heads break the surface of this low-oxygen water to gulp the air. Most of these carp are too big to be prey for the herons and egrets who have returned to nest on these banks. So, as the Coves Collective, we have tried to establish better relations with this place by harvesting carp. We honor their lives by eating their flesh when it is safe, tanning their hides and transforming their scales into sequins. Carp leather and scales have been worked into the Tracing Careful Paths map, marking the waters they call home. We do this work because we attend to this place as we walk here, harvest clay and plants here, and attempt to enter reciprocal relationships here. Not because this place belongs to us, but rather because we, the Indigenous and non-Indigenous members of the Coves Collective, are in the process of belonging to this place.